We can start this session.
Yeah.
तेजस्विनामधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्तिः। Everyone, today we have Sri Jayan Kapetkar ji. He is a graduate from IIT Kanpur and he had done his MBA from Delhi University. He is a founder CEO of STAM Interactive Solutions, a company based in Princeton Junction, New Jersey, United States. It provides self-paced interactive e-learning solutions. Sri Jayan sir is a author of a very recently published book, Science Meets Spirituality. He is a man of science with its roots which goes down to spirituality. And he is a passionate follower of Vedanta. I hand it over to Sri Jayan sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me for this talk. The name of the presentation is What Can Science Learn from Vedanta? It's a topic which is pretty unexplored. So we'll try to explore this topic today in our presentation. What can science learn from Vedanta? The short answer is science can learn a lot, but unfortunately, this is not what is happening there. The main reason for this is the science has hardly any clue about Vedanta. The exposure toward Vedanta for them is very limited. Most scientists, the scientific community has very limited knowledge about Vedanta. And secondly, also Vedanta teachers have little understanding of science. So these two together make it very difficult for connecting science and Vedanta together. So the focus of this presentation today is to show the connections between science and Vedanta. So the way we'll do it today is first we'll focus on trying to understand some concepts of Vedanta, and then we'll try to see how it connects towards science. The first step is to understand our inner core. That's the key. Understanding the nature of our inner core, understand the powers which are inherent in the inner core is very critical. Once you understand this inner core properly, then you can apply that knowledge to science. And that's how we are going to proceed today. We'll first try to understand our inner core properly. I'm sure you people must be exposed to that, but I will give you my presentation, my understanding of the inner core as such. If you ask the question, who am I? Most people will not ponder on this question at all because they're so sure they are the body and mind complex there. The body and mind complex was with them when they were born, and the body and mind complex is with them right now, and the body and mind complex will be with them till they die. So they may not even ponder who really I am. So the question you can ask them, which part of the body are you? Are you the hand? Are you the leg? Are you the chest? Are you the head? And they may not have a proper answer to that. They may say, we are all these parts together as one body. Then you can ask a question to them. What happens if someone has an injury and he loses 2 legs? Does that person become a half a person? Does that person become a quarter person because he has lost a limb or a leg or a hand? If you ask a person who's disabled, he will definitely answer, he still feels whole. He never feels half because he has unfortunately lost a limb due to some accident or due to some reasons. So he still feels full. So that means they're difficult to associate yourself with a body. Let's look at it from a different angle now. Let's say, suppose there's a table in front of you and there's a tree outside. I ask you a question, are you this tree? Are you this table in front of you? You may look shocked and say, of course, I'm not this table, I'm not this tree. And I ask you, why you're not this tree or a table? You would answer saying that, obviously, I know this table, I can see this table, I can perceive this table, or I can perceive this tree. Therefore, I'm not this person. I'm not this tree or a table there. So something which you can view and see or know something, you cannot be that. So that logic is quite easy to apply to all the external objects, the trees, the place, the cars, the houses. You can all say, I perceive that, I know that, so I cannot be these objects there. So next, what happened to your hand, legs, body? If I ask you, do you know your hand? Do you know your legs? You say, of course, I know my leg. Do you perceive that? The same logic, if you apply and to the hands, body, and different parts of the body, you will come to the conclusion, you know them, you perceive them, you're aware of these parts of the body. So obviously, then you are not that part of the body also. You're not that body, you're not that hand, because you perceive it. The same logic which you applied for the external objects, you apply to your body there. So you're not your body parts. That's obviously true because you know it, you can perceive it, you're witnessing it. Then what about the perception? You may say you're the mind then. And in the mind, you have a lot of things happening. You have perception taking place. You have all the thoughts there. You have a lot of memory coming up there. And all these things, again, once again, you ask the same question, are you aware of it? You obviously are aware of all the thoughts, objects in your mind itself, basically. So you cannot be your mind, the thoughts, mind, and memory. Then who are you? Then you might say, I'm the ego there. Ego is again a very interesting thing because it's the closest to ourselves. If you talk about ego, ego plays many different roles in our day-to-day life. Ego has different roles. Like it says, I'm the father, I'm the mother, I'm the son, daughter, I'm the husband, wife, I'm a writer, I'm a teacher, I'm a student. It can be, I'm a boss. When you are a subordinate to your superior, when you're a subordinate, I'm a meditator. All these are different roles played by the ego on a day-to-day basis. Ego has multiple roles you play. These are all different roles you play, basically. You play the role of a son, or you can play the role of a father. So 10 minutes later, you play the role of a father. So you play different roles during that, and that's all done by the ego, basically. So same question can be asked. Do you know you're a father? Do you know you're a son? You say, of course I know. So these again are some things which you are aware of. So you cannot be even the ego, basically. So basically, the world is very simple. The universe is very simple. There are only two things in the universe. One is your inner self and the rest of the external bodies. There are only two simple things in this world. One is yourself and the rest of it is everything else. The rest includes your ego, mind, body, external objects there. And so we need to understand what is this inner self, basically. We need to understand that properly. And like I mentioned earlier, once you have a good understanding of your inner self, you can apply that knowledge towards science, basically. So let's continue on that. So Vedanta has been very clear. It teaches us that your inner core is Sat Chit Ananda. So we need to understand what does Sat Chit Ananda. I'm sure you people must be aware of this word. I'll just repeat it again, just in case you're not aware. Sat means real. This real is not the real which you use on a day-to-day basis. This real means real. And what does that mean? It means that it should be present in all the three tenses. That an object should be present in the past, it should be present right now, and it should be present in the future. So you need to find something which is Sat, which was present in the past, is present right now, and it will be present in the future. So if you look around in the universe, you will not find anything which is real, because this universe itself started about 13.7 billion light years behind, and it is right now present, and maybe in the future, it might just disappear. So it doesn't meet the definition of real because it was not present before 13.7 billion light years away. And so this Sat is unchanging, because once something which is always been there, it is unchanging. If something is unchanging, it must be unborn also. It must be uncaused. There'll be no cause for it to come. It's been just present. It's just present there. That Sat, Chanda, Ananda is always present basically. And it is uncreated. So this Sat is of the Sat Chit Ananda is always present. It is something which is always there. And that is what is your inner core basically. The nature of this Sat, this real thing, which is the only thing which is real, because everything else in the universe is not real. Like I mentioned, the universe changes, everything in the universe changes. It is not Sat. The only thing which is real is your inner core basically. And that inner core is Chit also. It is the nature of this Sat is Chit. It is Chit means awareness. A lot of people also translate this as consciousness, but I feel awareness is a more accurate word. So this Sat's nature is, it is full of awareness basically. And we'll discuss what do we mean by awareness. We'll define awareness in the coming slides there. And lastly, the Satchidananda is also Ananda. Ananda means bliss or happiness. It's not momentarily bliss you get. Suppose you get a lottery, you win a lottery and you feel suddenly happy. So we're not talking about that sort of happiness, because that happiness comes and goes basically. That's momentarily. So that's not the type of Ananda we are talking about. We're talking the nature of your inner core, which is always bliss. It is always complete. It doesn't need anything else. It's full and it's complete. So that's the Ananda you're talking about there. So Sat is your real nature. Sat is your real thing inside you. And the nature of this Sat is awareness, and it is always happy. So we're going to focus on the Chit part of it, the awareness part, because we need to understand awareness, because awareness is a very powerful underlying reality of this universe. So before you understand awareness, we need to understand experiences. Experiences we are having continuously in our mind there. Sometimes the experience is visual, sometimes it is audio, sometimes it is a feeling of touch, sometimes it's a feeling of awareness of experience of smell, we have of taste, or sometimes experiences of memory. So our mind is full of memories, is full of experiences on a continuous basis. Unless we don't go to sleep, deep sleep, we have continuous experiences during the daytime at least. And one thing is important to understand, this experiences only happen in the mind. It doesn't happen outside you, it happens inside you. So your only connection to the universe outside you is only through your mind, experiences in your mind, because anything may be happening outside. It's no good unless you don't experience it inside your mind. Your experiences are always inside your mind itself only. So how do you define experience? Experience has to have two ingredients. One is awareness, the other one is form. If you have an experience, you are definitely aware of the experience. You can never have a situation where you can say, oh, I had an experience, but I'm not aware of it. That is impossible there. Whenever you have an experience, you must be aware of it. This applies to each and every experience we have. So each of us are aware of all the experiences. The ingredient of the experience is awareness. The ingredient, the inside ingredient of experience is awareness. If there was no awareness, you will not have the experience there. So experience cannot live without awareness. Awareness must be part of this experience basically. Then what happens is that the form which are superimposed on this experience, so on this awareness to complete the experience there. So whenever the form, it could be coming from different parts. It could be coming from your eyes. It could be coming from your ears. The forms could be your taste, your smell. All these forms are coming, and then they superimpose itself on the on awareness, and then only you can have the experience there basically. And this form keeps changing. There's two experiences are never the same. The experiences are never the same because the form keeps changing. The form is continuously changing. Sometimes it's sound, sometimes it is visual, sometimes it is taste, sometimes it is memory. So all the forms are coming from different inputs, and that superimposes itself on awareness to complete the experience outside. So form changes, experience changes, but the awareness remains the same. And it's important to understand that my awareness is my awareness in my mind different from your awareness in your mind? So that's an interesting question. Basically, if you understand awareness properly and how the mind works, the awareness is the same. The awareness in your mind And the awareness in my mind is exactly the same. It's the same awareness in all the minds, not only yours and mine, but every living being in this universe has the same awareness there. And this principle of experience equal to awareness plus form is true for every experience in every mind in every living being, basically. So let's try to understand what is awareness. What do you mean by awareness? What are the ingredients of awareness? Awareness has basically three things. It must have three basic ingredients in any awareness. It must have a subject, it must have an object, it must have intelligence, where the subject knows the object there. So these are the three ingredients. You can say if something like a molecule is made of, water is made of hydrogen and oxygen, in the same way, awareness must have these three things. Awareness must have ingredient of a component of subject, intelligence, and object. So we'll discuss this in a little bit more detail. So what do you mean by subject? There must be a subject who's aware of the experience. The subject is supposed to be the knower of the experience. So if you have a subject who's aware of an experience, there must be a knower who knows this experience there. So there's a subject who knows this experience there. And also there must be an object which must be experienced. This object is known as a known part of the awareness. So there must be an object in awareness. And lastly, there must be a connection between a subject and an object. You may have a subject and you may have an object. If the subject doesn't know what the object is, you will not have the experience there. So there must be intelligence which will tell the subject, this is the object, what it is. So there must be a connection between the subject and object, and that is done through intelligence. So each of these three components are a must in any experience. They are the basic ingredients of any experience there. If there will be no experience, if any one of them is missing there, for example, if there was no subject and there was lots of objects around the place, you will not have any experience because there's no one to experience it as such. So subject is almost necessary and compulsory. The same way, if there is a subject around waiting to have an object to be seen, but if there's no objects around, he will have no experience at all. So the object is also very, very important there. And also very critical is the intelligence there. There may be subjects, there may be objects around the place, but if this subject doesn't know what the object is, again, there will be no awareness as such. So intelligence also is part of a must component of awareness. Just to summarize again, awareness must have three. For example, right now, if you are listening to me right now, the experience you're having of listening to me definitely has a subject who's this listener of this experience. And then there's an object, which is me, my talk is the object. And there is intelligence within you, which is connecting this subject and object. And that's how you're aware of this experience of listening to this talk, which I'm giving to you. So it's very important to understand that subject, object, and intelligence are the basic three ingredients of this awareness there. Now let's try to understand the powers which is within this awareness as such. So just to summarize again, understand awareness is equal to subject, object, and intelligence. There are three powers within the subject and within the awareness. One is the power of the knower. The power of the knower means which knows, it has the capacity to know the object. That is the power of the known. Power of the known is the power which creates the object, is the power of the known. We'll discuss this in a little more detail. And there's the power of knowing, which is the power of intelligence, which decodes the object so that the subject can know about this. And Vedanta, they talk about Maya Shakti, which is a very powerful word. This Maya Shakti is nothing but the power of the knower, the power of the known, and the power of knowing. These three together make up Maya Shakti, which is they call what the one which creates the universe, the Maya Shakti. This has the power of the intelligence, it has the power to create objects, and it has the power of knowing what the objects are. So these are the three powers. We will discuss the power of knowing and the power of known in a little bit more detail to understand the power which is behind awareness and which is the most critical part, which is the underlying reality of the universe, the awareness. Let's talk about awareness, power of knowing now. Let's take some examples to understand the power of knowing. This is a typical statement I've said it in more like to understand, decode these three different subjects. I say, for example, I'm the seer seeing the tree. So here, you may not talk like this every day. You may just say, I'm seeing the tree, but I'm just making this clear by saying that I'm the seer seeing the tree. So here what happens now? Who's the subject out here? The seer is the subject, which is not your ego. Ego is not the seer. Ego is just attaching itself to the thing, which I'll discuss a little bit. And then you have an object, which is the tree, and the ego, which is I am. And the I am part attaches itself to the seer and say, I'm the seer. So it says, I'm the seer. But actually, seer is very different from the I am. The I am is the ego part of it. The seer is the subject, and the object is the tree. And there is intelligence there, which is telling the seer, this is a tree. That is given by the power of seeing. The power of seeing is part of intelligence there. You might say, no, my eyes is providing that power. But if you really understand, the eye does nothing except it receives a signal from the external world. It could be a tree, it could be a car, it could be anything. It goes, falls in your retina, and then it sends to your brain. And that's it. Then after that, nothing, nobody knows what happens after that. It is the awareness with the power of seeing decodes that signal and creates that awareness that this is a tree. So the power of seeing is what connects the seer with the tree. Just another example is I'm listening, I'm the listener listening to music there. Here again, the ego is I am, and the object is the listener, and the object is the music, and the intelligence which is there, which is within awareness. All the subject, object, intelligence is part of the awareness. That's why you're aware there. There's a listener who's listening to the music, and there's an object which is there, and there's an intelligence which connects the listener and decodes the music so that the listener knows, oh, this is the music I'm listening. I like this music. I don't like this music. That's separate. But the power of listening is within awareness, or the power of knowing, which decodes the signal. So the power of knowing is a very powerful tool and available within awareness. I've just given you two examples here. It could be anything. It could be any verb you take and you put ing, ing, and that is it. It could be listening, eating, sleeping, talking, understanding. All these are power of within the power of knowing. So the power of knowing is the most powerful force. Our minds are limited, so we only can understand the power of that, which comes through our five senses: eyes, ears, nose, teeth, skin, so feeling. But the power of knowing it has so much intelligence. It has intelligence of the full world, basically. The full universe, what is possible is there. But we have a limited mind, so we have limited powers, basically. The power of listening, the power of talking, power of thinking, power of seeing, power of understanding, power of talking, power of walking, power of eating. All these are powers which are within the power of knowing, basically. But the key to understand here is that the power of knowing is part of awareness there. This is not something which is hanging outside. It is part of awareness. That awareness is what is the chit, which is part of Sachidananda. That power of knowing is within this awareness itself. The other very important power is the power of known. Power of known is the power to become any object there. It has the ingredients, like atom has molecules and what do you call, not a molecule has atom, protons, gluton. The power of known has the capacity to become any object. It doesn't create the object, it becomes an object. Like, for example, the Play-Doh we have as kids have using Play-Dohs. You have a Play-Doh, lump of Play-Doh. You can convert the Play-Doh to become a car. It can become a house. It can become a man. You can manipulate the Play-Doh. You can superimpose a form onto this Play-Doh to become that object, basically. The same thing as power known is that power which can become any object there. The input is coming from eyes. For example, you're seeing a car. The input is coming from the eyes, telling you the coding, telling you that it is a car. And then the power of known, which is the power within awareness, it knows it's a car. So it gives the ingredients of the power to that coding so that the car becomes a car physically. So that power of known is a very powerful force. It creates, it becomes any form. If you superimpose music onto it, it plays music basically onto the power of known. And then if it's a tree coming inside, it superimposes the tree onto the power of knowing, a power of known, and it becomes the tree there. So the power of known is another very, very important power, which is a part of awareness there. So it's very important to understand that the awareness is the most critical force in our inner core, which is Satchidananda, and awareness is one of them. So Vedanta teaches that inner core is a substratum of the universe. It's the most powerful force in the universe. In the inner core is a subjective knowledge. That's what science will tell you, that the inner core is a subjective knowledge because it is within you. It's not an object there. With the different powers, the external objects depend on the subject there. So everything outside, the objects are created by the inner core, basically, the power of known, the power of knowing. So everything is created. The external objects are created by the by the power of inside you, basically. So with different powers, the external knowledge of objects depend on the subject. The subject is which is our inner core, is the most powerful thing in the universe, basically. But the problem is that the science focuses on objects only. They refuse to acknowledge subject. And that's where the major problems come there. The moment you bring a subject into with scientists, you talk to them, they say, no, we don't want to talk about subject. We just want to analyze the object, and the object meets some predetermined properties, we will accept it. Don't bring a subject into account. And that's where the problem full science is having there, because they refuse to acknowledge the subject. But we just shown that everything depends on the subject. Subject is the underlying force of the universe. And if you don't understand the subject, you obviously don't understand the objects also, basically, because the objects are totally dependent upon the subject as such. So subject and object are the same, part of the same universe. Science must understand the inner core. They must understand awareness, basically. Once they understand awareness, they can understand the powers which are inherent in awareness. Many of the stumbling blocks of science can be resolved as such. So let's move on. Vedanta helping science. Vedanta can help science in many, many different ways. In my book, which I've recently published, I have covered many different aspects. And some of the aspects which I've covered in how Vedanta can help science is a structure of space, for example. Science has no clue about the space. Where does space start? Where does it end? How does the space be created? Science has no clue. They're still struggling there. But if you understand your inner core, you can straight away say the space is coming from that inner core. The inner core awareness is your structure. The space starts from your inner core, from your inside you. So starting of space is inside you. So that I will not explain here in detail, but it is part of my book. So the structure of space is one thing which science, Vedanta can help. The other one is energy now. Science has no clue from where does this energy come. You see the full universe there, you see the sun, you see so many stars, you get amazed by where does that energy come from. Once again, the energy comes from your inner core only. There's no other place from which the energy does not come. It is come from your inner core. Your inner core has infinite source of energy there. I will not explain that today. It is not, because otherwise it'll take too much time. But energy is part of the inner source, basically. Again, the time, how does time start? Where did it start from? Again, it started from Satchidananda, from your inner core. That is where time also comes from. Quantum physics is another aspect which is very interesting these days. A lot of scientists are trying to understand quantum physics, and they get very puzzled that sometimes objects are basically wave, sometimes it's particle, sometimes the objects are particle, sometimes it's wave, sometimes it's particle. They're not able to understand how and wave becomes a particle, and where does the wave properties reside, and where does it, because what we see in the universe is only particles, basically. We never see waves anywhere in the universe there, but there are waves around. For example, your own self, there's a wave property of each one of us. There's a wave property of particle property of each wave one of us. If you see a car outside, you see the particle part of the car. But there's a wave part of the car also. Where is the wave part? Where does it reside? Science doesn't want to discuss this. They don't investigate this. But if you understand Vedanta, this answer becomes very simple and straightforward, basically. Then you have the theory of everything. Science is struggling to find the theory of everything. They are trying to smash particles in the UK, in Europe, trying to find the substratum of all the particles there. They're spending billions of dollars. They will never find the particle with the theory of everything unless they don't understand awareness, because awareness is the only substratum of the universe. Everything is made of awareness in this universe, basically. Unless they don't understand awareness, they will never find the theory of everything. Even motion, we see motion everywhere. We see people moving, cars going, people driving. But it is to know, if you understand Vedanta, if you understand the concepts of Vedanta, and if you also apply some of the principles of science, like theory of relativity, you will come to understand the motion, what we know, is totally different from the motion, what we actually see. For example, just to give you an example, if you're walking towards a tree, I can ask you a question, is the tree coming to you, or are you walking towards the tree? You will answer, obviously, I'm walking towards the tree. That's what your experience there. But if you understand Vedanta, you understand the principles of Vedanta, you apply to motion, and you apply the principles of relativity also to this, the correct answer is that the tree is coming to you. You're fixed. Your mind is fixed. Your mind is outside the space-time fabric. The mind doesn't move. Mind is fixed. So if your mind is fixed, it cannot move. So what does it move? The trees are coming towards you. I've explained all this in detail, but today we will not go into much detail of this. Makeup of objects. We just discussed awareness is the makeup of objects, the structure of objects. People are trying to find atoms, quarks, they're trying to, all sorts of things they're trying to find, but that's not the way they're going to find out how the objects are made. Dark energy, dark matter is another interesting subject, which we have discussed in our book. Entanglement is another very interesting part of physics, which is unknown to most scientists. But if you understand Vedanta and you apply the principles of Vedanta, you can solve this problem also. Multiverses, another very interesting subject. People believe there are multiple verses, multiple universes, but they have no clue what they mean by multiple universes, how do they exist. But we have discussed this and showing that if you have a basic understanding of Vedanta, these questions can be answered as such. Even gravity, how we think about gravity is totally different from what right now, because science also doesn't understand how fully gravity works as such. So there are many different ways where Vedanta can help science. Just 1 minute, let me drink some water, just 1 minute. Lastly is the real perception process. We'll discuss this one aspect of this in a little bit more detail to show how Vedanta can help science. So we'll discuss the real perception process in more detail. The real perception process. So how do we perceive? Science has been telling us for many years that light falls from a remote location, reflected light comes towards your eyes, it falls on your retina, and then it is sent to your visual cortex. And for the visual cortex, it goes there. And then how the image is created, science doesn't talk about. They keep completely silent. And also they don't tell who's watching this image there. It's so many things happening in your mind. It doesn't tell how the image is formed. It doesn't tell you who's watching there. So science believes there's a universe out there, and then this universe out there is converted through the retina, through the eye, to a universe within you as such. That's how science believes. Also, it's incomplete because it doesn't tell you how the image is created within your mind. Vedanta has been very clear. It says the content from your mind is projected out there. So basically, there's a universe within you, and that universe is projected out there. That's how science, Vedanta teaches there. So they're totally opposite of each other. Science says there's a universe out there, and that comes inside. And Vedanta says, no, there's a universe inside you, which is projected out. So they're totally opposite there, completely opposite from what Vedanta science and Vedanta's perception process is different. So which is correct? Obviously, Vedanta process is definitely correct. So we will explore that in little more detail. So the limitations of the current perception process, everything depends on reflected light. So how does science teach you about, they say there's a light source which reflects on an object, and then the reflected object comes towards your eye, basically. So that's how, so everything, the perception, the full process depends on the reflected light. Isn't that asking too much of a reflected photon to do that process, basically? For example, you're seeing a star, which is about 10 million light years away. 10 million light years, that means light takes 10 million light years to reach you. And there are thousands of people looking at the star all around the galaxy, all around the universe. So how does that photon reach to all those spaces it's been traveling for 10 million light years. So it's been traveling and traveling and traveling for 10 million light years, and then it reaches your retina, and then it creates an image there. And after 2 minutes, another photon has to come because you're watching that site completely. So there has to be a complete new stream of photons coming there. And we know that photon, like light, when you pass through a prism, it breaks up into 7 different colors. The same way, photons, if you understand the property of photons, it keeps changing. Sometimes photon becomes a different particle, and then it becomes back the same particle. It keeps changing the form, keep changing the frequency, things from quantum level, it jumps in the orbit. So photon is not something which is the integrity. You cannot question the integrity of a photon. How does the photon remain if coming from 10 million light years? How does the photon keep its purity, that it is keeping its same wavelength, it's keeping its same things, traveling 10 million light years? And you know that photon keeps changing its, so that's one big question mark. And secondly, once the photon hits your retina in your eye, how does the photon know what distance it has traveled? If it is coming from 10 million light years, does the photon know it come from 10 million light years? So once it goes to a virtual visual cortex and you create that image, that photon has to give the impression that it's come from that distance, or to give you the depth of that image. That means that photon has to have some memory. So obviously there's no memory in the photon. It's not been found. It is impossible. I don't think there's any photon has a memory. So how do you know what distance the photon has traveled? So even you assume the photon has some memory to show you that it's traveled that distance there. How does it transfer that information to a retina? So the retina has to know how far that photon has come from to create that impression that this is a very far away impression, or the object is very close. So it doesn't work that way at all. The photon is I say is an overrated process to do the perception process. And lastly, I'm not sure if you people are aware of the theory of relativity. If you apply the principles of relativity, it shows that photon does not travel at all. It's always here. I'm not sure if I want to go into too much detail here, but it is a fact that the photon really doesn't travel, because the photon is the only particle in this universe which travels at the speed of light. And we know that as per the basing on the principle of relativity, if something travels in the speed of light, there is no space-time fabric. There's no time, there's no distance, no space at all for anything which is traveling at the speed of light. From the principle, if you put a camera on a photon, on a traveling photon, the photon will not see anything. It will say that I'm not traveling at all, because it is traveling at the speed of light. And basing on the theory of relativity, anything traveling at the speed of light, it doesn't travel. The time doesn't move. So it is outside the space-time fabric, the photon. The full energy is outside the space-time fabric. So as an observer, you think the photon is traveling, but from the photon's point of view, it is not traveling. So we're not going to this detail out here because it's not that important here, but just to give you an idea that really the photon doesn't travel at all. So now we understand that the current perception process has a lot of problems there. Now we'll try to show that what Vedanta teaches is where the projection is the only truth, that we are projecting what's in our mind is the only truth. We're going to show that by science, by using logic, by using maths, and by using quantum physics, that this is the only truth and the only truth which is there. That means we are projecting the universe. The universe is not out there, and we are projecting the universe from our mind, basically. So we're going to use science basically first. Again, coming to the theory of relativity by using science. So what happens is that just to briefly mention that one of the findings of the theory of relativity was that whenever there is motion, time slows down. Time means your physical time, your watch slows down. If someone is walking, someone is cycling, someone is going in a car, someone is going on a plane, the time for each one of them is different because they're going at different pace. But the difference is so small that is not noticeable. Only it will be noticeable when you're traveling in some percentage of the speed of light. But it is the fact that whenever the motion is there, time slows down. That's a fact which is proven by the theory of relativity. So in this example, you can see there's a person walking, there's a person running, and there's a person going by cycle. So each one of them has a separate space-time. They're creating their own. They have their own time clicking. If the time is separate for them, the space they create is also different. So the space is being created separately means each one has got his own space. That means each person is creating his own space. So theory of relativity, if you apply the understanding of theory of relativity, clearly shows that each person creates their own space as such, because motion slows down time. It may be very minute, but it does slows down time. So if you start walking, your space will start compressing. If you go by cycle, your space is more compressed. If you go by a car, your space is more compressed. So if your space is more compressed means you're having a separate space than a person who's stationary. The person who's stationary has a different space dimensions than the person who's going in a car. So the theory of relativity clearly shows that each person creates their own space as such. So it is proving that projection is the only truth there. So we have shown it by the theory of relativity that each person creates their own space. That by using logical reason now, for example, now this is a diagram you see. There's a faraway star which takes 5 million light years for the light to reach you. Now, if you come closer, the sun, it takes light 8 minutes to reach you. The moon, which is much closer, light takes 3 seconds to reach you. Then you have a plane flying at 30,000 feet. Light takes about 3 into 10 raised to minus 3 microseconds to reach you. There's a tree which is maybe 20 feet or 100 feet next to you. It takes about 10 raised to minus 6 seconds to you. So you see that as the space, things which are closer, light takes less time to reach you. So if you extrapolate this backwards, the only place where light will take 0 seconds to reach you is that inner core within you, the observer within you, the inner core within you is where the full space starts from there, because light will take 0 seconds to reach you. So the starting point of the space is within you. And that's what by logical reasoning, and this sort of experience is applicable to everyone. My experience will be when I see my objects outside my window and you see objects outside your window, your objects are different, but you apply the same principle, you'll also come to the same conclusion that the starting of space is within you. If you apply the same reason what I've given out here, so each one of us can apply the same principle and each one will come to the same conclusion that the space starting is within you as such, basically. So that if the starting space of mine is different from space is different from yours, it means that I'm projecting my universe, you're projecting your universe there. So by logical reasoning, I've shown that the start of space is within us, basically, from within each living being. By using maths there. Not going much deeper detail, there's a thing called Hubble's constant, which is a science-based thing. Many years back, they found a telescope, a powerful telescope, and they looked into this into space, and they found a star which was 3.3 million light years away, and they wanted to see if that star or that planet is expanding, moving away from the person there. Because right now, what is happening with space that they know space is expanding, but they have no clue how the space is expanding and why the space is expanding. I'm not going to go in much detail here, but they find out that the star, which is 3.3 million light years away, and they kept watching it to see if it is expanding. They found out it is expanding at the rate of 72 kilometers per second as such. So that's a known fact, but there's no mathematical proof for this 72 kilometers per second. In my calculation, I've shown that the Hubble constant can be calculated to 72 kilometers per second. And to do that is to show that the space starts from within you. And the outer reaches of the universe, which is the Big Bang area, which is 13.7 billion light years away, that is expanding further away. And if you do the calculation properly, it will tell you that it is indeed expanding at 3.3 million light years away. The science will show, the calculation will show it is expanding at 72 kilometers per second. So it shows by mathematics also that each one, the space is starting from within us. Each one of us is creating their own space there. Lastly, by quantum physics there, like I mentioned earlier, quantum physics is a one science which talks about waves and particles there. So it's always there that the wave collapses to become a particle. That's what quantum physics shows. So here in our mind, the waves are there and that collapses to become a particle there. So the wave function comes first, then the particle comes there, not the other way around. It is not that the particles come first, then the wave comes first. So second, it is the particle which collapses. Even science, quantum physics also agrees with this concept that the wave collapses in the presence of an observing system to become a particle. So the wave has to come first, then only that collapses in the presence of an observing system to become an object there. So, in quantum physics also agrees that the wave function comes first, and then what you call the particle function comes. And the waves are the vrittis in your mind, which collapses in the presence of the inner core to become a particle as such. So quantum physics also agrees that the projection is what the only truth is basically. Are we going okay on time? Is it okay? Or are we still, am I running out of time?
No, sir. You can talk.
Okay. So projection is the only truth. So let's see how does a projector work basically. A digital projector must have two things. It must have a light source. It must have digital content and which is projected out. The same thing is happening in a mind. Your awareness, your inner core is a bulb of awareness, which is radiating awareness. And the content from the five senses is coming in the mind. And that five senses content is being projected as the universe outside. So let's see how your mind projector is working as such. So projection of the mind, you have a mind which is projecting the universe outside, and that's the only truth, which is very contrary to what science teaches. But the only truth is that the projection takes by the mind itself. So how does a projector work? If you understand a painting, painting is a one. Vidya Narayana in his sixth chapter of Panchadashi explains how your mind projection takes place can be compared to a painting as such. A painting requires four things. It needs a canvas. Then you need to harden the canvas with starch to put a lining behind it. Then you do a line drawing on the painting. Then you add color to manage the painting. This is exactly what is happening with the projection basically. First, you need space, which is like a canvas on which you can project things. Then you need to harden that space with energy. And then you create a subtle image on that canvas or on that space time. And then you add awareness to it to complete the projection there. So how a painting is made is exactly how the projection of the universe also takes place. Space is again, I'm not sure if you're a science student and you understand this sort of diagram on the right-hand side, which is a grid there. This is called the space-time. Einstein made a connection between space and time, and he called it space-time. But there's a lot of confusion about this space-time as such. Space-time is something like a fabric you can think, but it's not something which is in the space, because space-time is only made of time. Time is the only ingredient of the space-time fabric, because time and space are interconnected. So this space-time is made of time, and this space-time fabric, science doesn't understand it, but it is within your mind. Because anything subtle has to be in your mind. There's no subtle objects in the universe outside. What you see outside is only particle objects. You see objects. There's no subtle objects there. Any wave, any subtle things, it's all part of your mind, basically. So this space-time fabric, if you can call it a fabric, is within your mind itself. And this fabric is made of time as such. Time is the ingredient of this fabric, basically. There are pixels in the space-time fabric. You can see the pixels, the small dots around the fabric. It's not continuous, and these are all time-based, basically. So there is infinite energy in your mind, which I've discussed earlier, which I didn't explain in detail, but there is infinite energy in your mind. A part of the energy is used to stretch out time. You have time, you stretch out time and create space, basically. So 1 second of time from that fabric which I showed you, this fabric, which of 1 second of this fabric is stretched out to create 186,000 miles of space, basically. That's the canvas which is being created out there. And that, so part of the energy stretches time. 1 second of this space-time fabric becomes 186,000 miles of space, basically. So the space-time is your space-time fabric is within your mind, which is made of time. There's energy within your mind. And that energy stretches out this time and creates space, basically. So 1 second of your, because light, we know, travels at 186,000 miles. So 1 second of that fabric becomes 186,000 miles of space, basically. That's how space is created from your space-time fabric, by stretching out time with energy which is within you as such. So once you have that fabric there, that each nodal point, you can see each of these nodes is a time-based thing, and there is energy within your mind. When you combine that nodal energy, which is on each node, with the energy with the space-time fabric, you get a complete electromagnetic spectrum at each point. So each point out here is vibrating with the full spectrum of energy there. Even science has found this. They call it the vacuum energy. The vacuum energy is something within, inside there. It's within the space. There is energy inside it. That energy is nothing but the space-time fabric. At each nodal point, you create the energy, basically. That's what is there. Then once you have the energy base, the hardening of that space-time fabric is by the energy which is there. And then you place objects on this space-time fabric, all in the mind, basically. Like, for example, you have a placement of objects. The sun, which is 8 minutes away, you place the object of 8 minutes away on your space-time fabric. The moon is 3 seconds away, because its light takes 3 seconds to reach you. The tree outside you is about maybe 600 feet away, which is 0.6, it takes 0.6 microsecond, 10⁻⁻⁶. So all the different objects are placed on this space-time fabric in your mind, basically. And then lastly, you put awareness, because this is in the mind. And when you combine this with the awareness, and then you have a projection which is complete, and that's how the projection of the universe takes place. So you can see that this is the very scientifically you can prove that the projection is the only truth of the universe. And what science is teaching at the moment is not accurate, because the knowledge is incomplete as such. But when you apply that knowledge of science to Vedanta also in the right way, it can show that projection is the only truth there. And this also applies to all the other areas where you can apply Vedanta principles to science, and it can change the way we perceive the universe as such. That ends my talk. And I have my book, which I recently published. It's called Science Meets Vedanta. And all these different topics which I mentioned, it's all available in this book. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Flipkart. It comes as a Kindle version, and it comes as a paperback version. And the price of this book is 695 rupees. With that, I'd like to end my talk. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Thank you, sir. We are very grateful for your talk, and we are very grateful that you have taken out of your busy schedule some time to speak to us. We have many questions, but we will shortlist them. The first question is, how can science and spirituality work together and bring about societal transformation?
The thing is that if you really look at it, science and spirituality are looking for the same. They have the same reality. They're looking for the same reality, basically. Um, Unfortunately, science is looking for the reality outside you. They're trying to look into different objects. They're trying to find the substratum of that objects. They're breaking them. They found the atom is made of made of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And then they broke up the protons. They found out it's made of quarks. Now they're trying to break up quarks. They're trying to find the same reality, basically. And fortunately, our spirituality in India, our rishis shut their eyes, they looked inside, and they found the same. The goal is the same. The science and what do you call Vedanta are looking for the same reality as such. So there's no two different realities. There's only one reality of the universe. Science is trying to find the same reality, and Vedanta is also trying to find this. Vedanta, in fact, has already found the reality. It's only that people don't understand that reality, basically. Does that answer the question?
Yes, sir. Sir, this is my personal question. How does unified field theory is explained in Vedanta?
See, again, like I mentioned to unified, if you talk about unified spirit, there are four forces in the universe there. One is the, what do you call that, electromagnetic force. Then you have the, what do you call, a strong nuclear force. Then you have the weak nuclear force. And then you have the gravity force. Although they haven't found the gravity force, but they think there's a gravity force. They feel that something similar, that all the four forces can be unified into one. Vedanta already knows about it. Awareness is the unifying force, basically. Awareness has, I'm not explaining this here, but in my book I have explained this in detail. The four forces come out of awareness. The nuclear forces, they're all part of awareness. The gravitational force is also part of awareness. Because actually, if you take over the three forces, the electromagnetic force, the weak nuclear force, and the strong nuclear force, are part of energy. The source is energy, and gravitational force is part of time. Time and are unified within awareness. So that's right now science is not able to unify them, because they have unified the three forces, which is the the three forces they know: electromagnetic force, weak nuclear force, and the strong nuclear force. They're not able to unify the gravitational force because they haven't found. But the gravitational force will be found only in time. Once they understand how the gravitational force works, time and energy are unified in awareness. So awareness is the theory of everything, the unifying force. Once you understand awareness, the properties of awareness, it becomes clear that these forces are part of this awareness. Awareness is the source, basically. And I've explained this in my book.
So the final question. What is your inspiration to write the book Science Meets Vedanta?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question. Many years back, 2004, before 2004, my knowledge of spirituality and my knowledge about things about Vedanta was not so good. In 2004, I managed to attend classes in the US. There was a very good school called Arshabodha Center in New Jersey, and there was a teacher who taught me Vedanta as such. That school only taught Vedanta, nothing else. In that class, I learned a lot of things. I learned about, I read about so many different Upanishads. I did Gita, all the chapters, all the verses twice over 8 years. And then, so once I started reading that, my life changed. My life about Vedanta and everything else I used to do stopped. Only thing I wanted to do was to learn Vedanta. So I was reading a lot of books. I was reading a lot of things, but things are not easy to understand initially. So I used to listen to my Swamiji's lecture 5 times, 6 times. I should keep repeating till things started sinking into my mind. And then I also was exposed to quantum physics. Being an engineer by training, I read a book on quantum physics. I found that very intriguing there. And then I tried to make connections between Vedanta and science as such. And once I started writing in 2014, I started writing essays connecting science and Vedanta. The writing part was the most important thing to me. When I started writing, I used to get surprised when because when you're writing, you can't write unless you don't know the subject matter. You need to know the matter. And my knowledge when I was writing beginning was 90% right, but I still was not complete. I used to get inspiration from inside. Something from inside is to come out and tell me the solution to what the issue which I'm trying to write there. And I used to get amazed how this, and by the end of the essay I wrote, I realized that I know more about the subject than at the beginning sort of thing. So this way I started writing more and more and I started gaining knowledge. And I felt that once I wrote a thing, that knowledge was part of me now. Now this knowledge will not leave me. If you read a book, if you listen to a lecture, you can still forget things. But once you write things and you write it correctly and you understand the thing, that knowledge becomes part of you. And that inspiration I feel is coming from my inner core. That Satchidananda is what my inspiration has come from. So in fact, I dedicate my book to Satchidananda. I tell them that it's my inspiration, it's my knowledge of and love for my inner core is what inspired me to write this book.
We would be very glad to read your book, sir. And we are very thankful for you again so that you took your time and spoke to us. We'll end the session with a Sana vow to pray.
Yeah, thank you.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinameditamastu ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll be very glad with your future association, sir.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question? Is this going to be put on YouTube by any chance?